This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. On this Wednesday morning, Hunter Biden is waking up smiling, looking out the window at the White House and saying, slip the news, got away with it. Have to be on probation for a couple of years. I wonder if I can go back to China. Who knows what Hunter Biden is thinking, but America is thinking double standard. And I'm going to talk about it all day today on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. Morning glory. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Play a little Hunter Biden music. I mean, the sun's coming up at the White House today, and Hunter's looking out of his taxpayer-provided bedroom and saying, recovery's pretty good. I'm sober, and good for him. Hope he is. And I don't have to go to jail. And I'll sell a couple of paintings and pay the fine. And I can't go anywhere that my dad isn't. So I'm stuck living in the White House for 2 years. Yeah, it's a joke. I know you know it's a joke, and there's not much to say about it. The only thing that could redeem it is that David Weiss, the U.S. attorney who has proposed the plea deal to the federal judge, put out a statement, quote, "The investigation is ongoing." His spokesperson refused additional comment from Delaware. The number of stories on this. Hunter Biden reaches deal to plead guilty in gun tax case. Republicans rail at sweetheart deal as Hunter Biden pleads guilty. Hunter Biden's messy path to a plea deal. Republicans claiming double standard vow to keep investigating Biden. The deal likely resolves Hunter Biden's federal investigation without prison time. Republicans claiming a double standard vow to keep investigating Biden. Who is David Weiss, the Trump appointee who led the investigation? The outcome focused attention on whether Hunter Biden gets a better deal than the average person would get. Hunter Biden to plead guilty on misdemeanor tax charge. All right. It is what it is. Hunter Biden is an addict who got a lot of money from somewhere, didn't declare his income, owed a lot of money, and bought a gun and lied on a federal gun registration. Two big questions here. Would anyone under other circumstances with the same crime and the same plea get the same proposed no prison time? And there are a lot of people out there saying, no. I went to jail. My son went to jail. My daughter went to jail. My client is in jail. And they did far less than this. But Hunter Biden is, he's free as a bird. And what you think about that depends a lot upon what you think about politics. We will wait and see. Other shoes will drop. In fact, I'll put this also on the grand old pod, but Bill Barr was on Fox News yesterday talking about this, and the former Attorney General is just on point, cut number 17.
Well, I think the indictment of President Trump, which was a grave, significant act, really demands that the department assure everybody that the investigations into the Bidens was thorough, and that the final decisions reached were reasonable. And I agree with Jonathan Turley. It's not looking that good. The key question, as you say, is this just the end of the gun and the tax case, or is this the end of the whole shebang, all the other things that were swirling around as the press reported on, alleged bribery, alleged money laundering, and influence peddling, and even allegations by whistleblowers of internal hanky-panky in the investigation. This demands a thorough accounting. And so I don't think the department can do what its normal act would be here, or normal posture would be, which is to say nothing. I think the public interest demands that they assure people of the integrity of this investigation and the fairness of the final decision. And they have a good opportunity to do that with Chairman Comer's committee. If everything is hunky-dory, then I think they have to lean forward and look at that as an opportunity to clear the air and show that this was a thorough and fair investigation.
No, they're not going to do that because I doubt it's a thorough and fair investigation. I just don't. I'm skeptical. Count me skeptical, and I just think people who are in jail right now for the same thing are outraged. Kevin McCarthy spoke for all Republicans yesterday when the speaker came out to a gaggle and said this, cut number 3.
My first reaction is it continues to show the two-tier system in America. If you are the president's leading political opponent, the DOJ tries to literally put you in jail and give you prison time. If you are the president's son, you get a sweetheart deal. Now, this does nothing to our investigation. It actually should enhance our investigations because the DOJ should not be able to withhold any information now, saying that because of pending investigation, they should be able to provide Chairman Comer with any information that he requires.
All right, now what's interesting is the U.S. attorney who brought this proposed plea deal forward yesterday said the investigation is ongoing. Is that an attempt to keep Congress at bay? I don't know. Nobody knows. It just stinks, right? It just stinks. Everybody knows it stinks because it took so long. And thank goodness this story was not broken to the New York Post, or it would have been banished to the outlying world. Tim Scott had a great comment on this. I'll replay this in the grand old pod later today. Cut number 8, Tim Scott.
It's dangerous. Let me just say, we all know this, that the big guy has some explaining to do, without any question. Sean, we cannot be the city on the hill if we are not first a nation of law and justice. We can't be the city on the hill. We cannot fulfill our destination, our destiny as America, if we do not have the Lady of Justice wearing a blindfold. We all have to be treated equally under the eyes and the laws of our country. And when the Bidens get away with that, we need to thank God for Senator Grassley and Congressman Comer for doing their jobs. But I can tell you, if they can't finish their investigation, President Tim Scott will finish it.
That's a great. He was on with Sean Hannity at Town Hall last night. Tim Scott really beginning to resonate with a bunch of people as an alternative, although Ron DeSantis remains firmly in second place. And I saw some closing in the numbers. People might be tired. I'm going to play, people might be tired of former President Trump. I think there might be some Trump fatigue with the lawsuits setting in. It's always a burden to carry an indictment. He sat down with Bret Baier on Monday night. I played a lot of that yesterday. I'm going to play more of it. The second part aired last night on Special Report. I'm going to play parts of that in the grand old pod today after the show, available only if you're a subscriber to the Universe. Of the hundreds of responses I got from the thousands of Universe subscribers, nobody's opinion changed about Trump. Very few people changed their opinion about Trump. And these are across the board. The Universians range from hardcore, always Trumpers, to never Trumpers, right? But they are vocal and smart, and they are all over the map, but they are where they were before the indictment of the former president came down 2 weeks and 3 days ago. And I'll go down to D.C. today, and I'll hear the same chatter about people saying the same thing. Nothing's going to change until we have debates. The ice is frozen, and then the ice, but the wearing away is steady. The pressure builds on Trump supporters to rethink or redouble their bets on Donald Trump, and that's it. Let me go to a couple of other bits of news. Everybody is praying for the 5 people in the submersible. Rescuers searching for it, according to the Telegraph this morning, have relocated to explore the source of sounds picked up by a Canadian P-3 subchaser, an analysis by United States Navy experts. So they're moving their remote vehicles to go and try and find the submersible sub with 5 people. They're running out of oxygen. I think today's the last day, so we'll keep you posted on that. 4 Israelis were killed in a terrorist attack yesterday. 4 were gunned down by Hamas terrorists at a West Bank gas station. 3 people were convicted of harassing a family on behalf of Chinese Communist government yesterday. 3 men convicted in Brooklyn federal court on Tuesday of stalking a family in New Jersey suburbs on behalf of the Chinese government. All right, so the CCP spies, the Chi-Coms, as we call them from the old days, are out trying to intimidate Americans of Chinese birth, Americans with Chinese family, or Chinese who are in the United States on green cards. And we're following that. The Washington Post had a fabulous story yesterday about Beth Reinhardt and Josh Dawsey, which I call a campaign ad tongue-in-cheek. Governor DeSantis used secretive panel to flip state Supreme Court. I mean, they really thought this was going to hurt Governor DeSantis, I think. But in fact, this is a love letter to Governor DeSantis from people who care about courts like me, because he flipped the Supreme Court from a 4-3 liberal court to a 6-1 conservative court in 4 years. And the details are there. Coming up after the break, I'm going to start my Jay Bhattacharya interview, which I did yesterday. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, probably the calmest, most persuasive, consistent critic of everything COVID that we did, and the smartest, MD, PhD, Stanford, head of their Center of the Economy and Demographics. Smart guy. I spent 80 minutes with him after the show yesterday to to talk with him about where we are after COVID. New statistics in the Wall Street Journal this morning on the devastation to America's test scores among 13-year-olds. I talked COVID with Dr. J for 80 minutes yesterday. I'm going to play a few segments of that on today's program. I encourage you to go and find the iTunes pod. And the whole video and audio are already posted at hughhewitt.com, where you can also subscribe for my newsletter. Stay tuned. I'll be right back. Joined now by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He is a professor of medicine, economics, and health. Joined now by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He is a professor of medicine, economics, and health research policy. Joined now by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Joined now by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He is a professor of Joined now by Dr. Jay. Welcome back, America. Won't you marry me, Bill? The Fifth Dimension, 1969. You say, why am I playing that? Because last night, Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I went out to dinner. And for whatever reason, a whiff of this came over the ambient music somewhere. And it's an earwig for both of us. Because it was released in 1969 when we're 13, right? You're in junior high. And I am of the profound belief that whatever you hear between the ages of 13 and 15 never leaves your brain. We knew the word. We immediately broke into the words because we know the words of this. And so we're going to play the Age of Aquarius record today. Adam didn't know that until all of our bumps are going to come from the Fifth Dimension Age of Aquarius album in 1969 because we just laughed and laughed. How is it? You know, we haven't thought of this song in 45 years, 50 years. I don't think I've heard it. And a little bit. The human mind is a remarkable thing, and the American music industry deeply influenced it via AM radio. I'm going down to talk about AM radio today, by the way. That's why I'm going to D.C. And AM radio was ubiquitous, right? From transistors under the bed to listen to the West Coast games when you were a kid and the Indians were playing on the West Coast swing, or just omnipresent in the life of a lifeguard, which is how I spent 5 summers. And I got to tell you, the ability, only Americans are like this. I don't know if Europeans are like this. I'm sure there's some people walking around like Dennis Prager who hear, 3 bars of a Beethoven's Third Symphony and they can tell you what movement it is. I don't. I hear a Fifth Dimension song, like 3 bars, and immediately we're singing the words. That's just what happened to the boomers. That may explain why we're so annoyed. Generalissimo, do you know the Fifth Dimension at all?
Of course I know.
You're too young to be a Fifth Dimension person.
I was young to be a big fan of them, but certainly, I mean, in my DJ world, I played them before. Sure.
Can you do all the words to "Won't You Marry Me, Bill"?
I
love you so. I always will.
I know the song. I know the lyrics. I know the Age of Aquarius, Beautiful Balloon, all that stuff. Yeah,
I
know the
dancing
band.
On Ed Sullivan's
you see, my parents had the record.
That's it. And if your parents had it's like the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt can do every song from Carousel because her mother played that. And
now somewhere you said about the human brain being a magical thing. Yes, my brain. There's a part that's still looping. It's a Small World.
Did you eat anything on the Small World? That might have been the beginning of my PhD weightloss.com.
I snacked my way through that ride a little bit here and there, but
you couldn't do the old Disneyland stuff under my PhD weightloss.com.
Oh, not a chance. Not a chance.
You had the Orange Food Group to get you through your 49
Absolutely.
Trips around
my
Small
50
World.
Trips.
It was not 50. We have it on
50.
tape.
No, we
play
do
the
have
tape.
it on tape. It's 50.
Let people hear the tape. I don't control the tape. You have the Zabruder tape of Dwayne not
doing 50
making
rides.
No, you did not make 50.
As,
but my PhD
weightloss.com,
you lost 50 pounds.
644
1900.
That's 864
644
1900.
All right. Now I want to go on and do the market report. Unlike Dwayne told me yesterday that the markets were open and they weren't. And if I had a producer, I wouldn't make. They weren't open. You told me yesterday the markets were open.
When did I tell you that?
Yesterday morning on the show, and everyone heard it. Juneteenth, you said the markets are open.
When did I say that?
Yesterday. Go back and listen to the tape next to
Was that the same place where you said it was only 49 rides?
Let's go listen to that tape
and
then listen to the tape of yesterday. I want to talk a little bit about Birch Gold. Go to hughgold.com, or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. Gold this morning is at $1,944. Dropped a little bit yesterday. Interest rates went down a little bit. It's at 3.73 on the 10-year Treasury. Everyone's waiting for Jerome Powell. And if Jerome Powell comes out today and says, we have not got inflation kicked, that gold price is going to go up. But do not trade gold. Birch Gold isn't for people who trade gold. Birch Gold is for people who put gold away for a long, long time, so that it's there. It will never go to zero. Historically, the last 100 years, it kept pace with inflation. So you buy gold, you put it into a Birch Gold administered, third-party administered, pursuant to IRS regulations, depository. It's physical gold. You can take a picture of it. You can call them up and say, can I look at my gold? I don't know if they actually let you do that. But it's there. It's yours. Belongs to you. Its value goes up. As gold goes up, it never goes to zero. HughGold.com. Time for my relieffactor.com because I have to do the dreaded overhead bag today. And I'm on a little plane from Portland International Jetport. I got to get in the car after the show, drive down to the Portland International Jetport, and spend all day in D.C. and then fly back late tonight from Reagan. Don't have to at least do Dulles, thank gosh. But there are my 4 pills. I take them right now. I should have asked Jay Bhattacharya about this yesterday, about Relief Factor. Dr. J is an MD, PhD, BA, MA from Stanford. I'm going to come back with him after the break and begin my interview with Jay Bhattacharya on all things COVID. After these horrific, just the 13-year-olds are back to 1950 levels of learning because of COVID. They need Relief Factor. They need exercise. I'm flying to D.C. I am ready for a long day. I don't get back until midnight tonight because ReliefFactor.com gets me through the day without aches and pains. You ought to take it every morning, and you ought to come right back for Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford. Joined now by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He is a professor of medicine, economics, and health research policy at Stanford. He's director of Stanford's Center for Demography and Economics of Healthcare. He has a BA from Stanford, an MA from Stanford, an MD from Stanford, and a PhD in economics, so he's not just your average bag of donuts. Dr. Bhattacharya, welcome. It's great for you to join me early. I appreciate it.
It's my honor for you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you are widely considered to be the calmest, most reasonable, and most persuasive critic of the public health policies of the last two administrations when it comes to COVID. And I want to look mostly forward, not backwards. But you're also the author of the Great Barrington Declaration, along with Martin Kulldorff and Sunitra Gupta, and a figure of some controversy in the medical community, though not with me. You're Larry Arnn's friend, which means you have extraordinary patience. But at the end or at the midpoint, we're at the midpoint of looking at the COVID health policy. How do you describe yourself in the public eye? What do you stand for in the eyes of everybody generally?
Well, my main argument during COVID is that we had to take account of the basic epidemiological facts about it in designing our policy. And that is that it was, well, there's two really. One, that there is a enormous age gradient in the risk of dying from COVID if you get COVID, right? It's older people primarily that have died. It's 80% of the deaths are people over 65. And whereas children face minuscule risk relative to other risks in their lives. That's fact one. I think nobody disagrees with that. Fact two is that the lockdowns that we employed are harmful. They're really, really deeply harmful, particularly to children, particularly to the poor, particularly to the working class. They are harmful. I've called them trickle-down epidemiology. The theory seems to be that if we protect, relatively well-off people, that we'll protect everybody. But in fact, that's not true. The disease spread despite the lockdowns, and the lockdowns caused tremendous. I mean, we can go through some of the litany of the harms they're caused, but it's catastrophic. I can't think of any public health intervention in modern history, certainly outside of wartime, that have had the same kind of catastrophic effects, including large numbers of people around the world thrown into poverty, starvation. It's just heartbreaking, Hugh. If you put those two facts together, the right policy always was and still is focused protection of vulnerable people, older people, primarily, whatever technologies we have. It could have been vaccination. It was vaccinations when we once had them. Before vaccinations, we should have been much more creative about protecting older people, and lifting lockdowns, not doing school closures, not doing, the whole litany of panic mongering, sort of chicken with a head cut off kind of policies we followed with a hope of slowing the spread when it was just basically futile to do so. We had some possibility of protecting vulnerable people. We had no possibility of stopping the disease from spreading from the moment we learned about this in late January 2020. I
want the audience who is new to me to know where I come from. So they might have come to this interview because you're there, Dr. J, and they have no idea who I am. So full disclosure for that audience who's listening, I was an early alarmist about the pandemic. Senator Cotton was on this show sounding the alarm about what was going on in Wuhan. I am greatly influenced by The Great Influenza, a book I'm sure you've read many times. I am a child of the polio era. My brother is a PhD toxicologist. I talked with him all the time about the science. So I was for the lockdowns. I was for social distancing. I was for masking outside. And when I was that way, I had early access to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, guests on the show each 3 or 4 times. But I grew increasingly skeptical as the data arrived that showed that the mortality was not going to get my grandkids, wasn't going to get my kids, it was going to get me. And so I began to change. I was very glad my grandkids were in England where they could go to school. They weren't shut out of school because they were deployed abroad, and England did the right thing on schools. So what I am mostly concerned about, and then Dr. Fauci stopped coming on after I asked him if he'd consider quitting because he'd lost confidence. I am now at the point where I'm very happy to have vaccines. I'm going to go get the booster. I can't wait to get the booster. I think if you're over 65, you ought to get the booster. So I want to start there with older people. What do you think about the efficacy of this generation of vaccines for COVID?
Well, it's really hard to say because what normally what you would have is solid randomized trial data. And with the original vaccines that were released in December of 2020, we had that. We had very very large scale trials with clinical endpoints that were meaningful. Protection against symptomatic infection that was at 95%. Now it's not as I would like to have seen a trial designed to measure protection against severe disease or death. We didn't have that, but we had something that I was comfortable enough to say, yeah, this is going to protect vulnerable older people. In fact, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that. With this booster, we don't have those data. We don't have a trial like that. We don't have a large-scale trial like that. And the other thing about the difference between now and then is that we have a very different immunological environment. And what I mean by that is that almost everybody's had COVID and recovered. It's basically not possible unless you are, Howard Hughes like in some cave where someone's serving you to have avoided COVID this whole time. And so what that means is that you have already innate protection acquired by the fact that you recovered from COVID, which means that the marginal benefit of any booster at this point is likely to be much lower than it was when you were immune naive.
Interesting, doctor. Just using myself as an example, I tell people I've never had COVID because I haven't been sick since the disease arrived, and I got the booster, and the vaccine and 2 boosters, and I don't think I've had it. But you're suggesting maybe I did, and I just had a mild case and didn't even notice it?
It's quite possible. I mean, you have the vaccine that it tends to reduce the severity of the disease, and so it's very likely that you've had COVID. Now, obviously, I haven't lived in your shoes, Hugh, the whole time, so I can't tell for sure.
Right.
But it's
I've been everywhere, so yeah, I've been abroad. I mean, I've traveled in with people who had COVID. I've been to parties, etc. What I want to get to, doctor, the most important thing is the future. I called Mycroft. I have 2 older brothers, Sherlock and Mycroft. They're much smarter than I am. I called Mycroft, the PhD like you, but he's a toxicologist. I said, what's the biggest threat right now? He said, well, there are 5 viruses out there which might go viral and become pandemic. He named Crimea something or other. He ran them off, and I can't remember, and I couldn't write them down fast enough. The issue for me now is what do we do to rebuild public health credibility? Because do you agree with me? It's shattered. It's in shreds. What do you think of U.S. Public Health Authority credibility right now?
I entirely agree with you. It is absolutely it's in the lowest point I've ever seen in my professional career, and unfortunately, I have to say it's well deserved that it's in shreds. Over and over, the top public health authorities in this country, including Tony Fauci, it's understandable. You are put in this position where you have to be the spokesperson for the entire all of public health. And you have a disease that's where the knowledge about it is rapidly coming in. It's like new things are coming in all the time, and so it's hard to stay up. I mean, it's hard. It's been hard enough for me to stay up, and I'm not facing that kind of public scrutiny as he was facing. But at that point, you have to be honest about what you know and you don't know, and you cannot manipulate the public. And unfortunately, that's exactly what Tony Fauci did from almost the first moment of the pandemic, right? If you look at FOIA मेरो early on from January 2020 between him and Francis Collins, they're basically organizing a cover-up about where this virus came from, about the possibility of a lab leak. They destroyed the careers or attempted to destroy the careers of anyone who suggested it was a lab leak, calling it a conspiracy theory. Then later, just shortly afterwards, in February 2020, Tony Fauci got on TV and said that you shouldn't wear masks, don't need masks. Actually, he was reflecting the honest consensus then of all scientists, or most scientists. If you looked at the randomized trial evidence before the pandemic regarding masks and the spread of influenza, the conclusion was that you don't have any evidence that it actually works. Masking, not like, if you're masking by someone, a trained surgeon wearing a mask in a surgical setting. I mean, that's a very different thing, right? So he was telling the truth then, but then a month later, he turns around and says, "Oh no, I was lying to you. I was lying to you because I wanted to protect hospital workers." Well, once you've admitted that, you've lost credibility. and then you had people. Then there was in mid-July. There were actually people in the United States were pretty solid on school opening, reflecting what had happened in Europe, in Sweden and Iceland and elsewhere, and people were in favor of school opening. All of a sudden, it seemed like on a dime it would turn against school opening, not based on any real data that had come out, but it looked to me like basically a political switch, as if it was as using kids to get at Donald Trump, make him make his re-election chances worse. I mean, I think so. There was that element of noble lies, that element of politicization. Then there was the BLM protests, right? So the Sturgis bike rally happens, and Republicans gathering to celebrate Harleys is dangerous, but then Democrats gathering to protest. Actually, it wasn't just Democrats. Lots of people gathering to protest racial injustice is somehow okay. People, and you have public health signing a letter. 1,000 people in public health signing a letter saying that that's okay for public health, but not the other protests. I mean, it's so obvious to the public that
what they were talking about. I don't want to slander anyone or libel anyone. But then the mask flip-flop. There were just lots of things going wrong. At what point did you, Jay Bhattacharya, lose confidence in them as longtime and I think widely respected authorities in the area of public health? Pause right there. We'll come back and we'll get Jay Bhattacharya's answer to that. I want to remind you the entire interview with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford is in a podcast that I dropped yesterday. The audio and video are already posted at hughhewitt.com. You can also sign up for my newsletter there. But the transcript Dwayne is working on, we talked for 80 minutes, so the transcript's taking Dwayne a long time, and it will be very useful to people who want a comprehensive look back. I'll play a little bit more of Jay Bhattacharya, then continue to talk to Mary Katherine Ham and a few other things coming up later. Don't go anywhere except to hughhewitt.com for the entire thing, our highly concentrated Hugh podcast. Stay tuned to The Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. The Age of Aquarius has got nothing to do with my guest, Mary Katherine Ham, co-host of Getting Hammered, the podcast that entertains and amazes many of you every single morning. Good morning, Mary Katherine. How are you?
I'm doing good, Hugh. Good to see you.
Do you even know what the fifth dimension are? Did your parents play the fifth dimension when you were a toddler?
No.
No. It's a total music vacuum that's in there, right? You just...
No, that's interesting because the Age of Aquarius, I know that. The reason I know that song is from the Hair soundtrack, which I was a great student of.
There's a way in. Last night that was playing in a restaurant, and now it's an earwig because it was on the air when I was 12 or 13. I'm wondering, what is the soundtrack of Mary Katherine Ham, Millennial Extraordinaire's life? What's in there?
Well, it's interesting because as a child, my dad gave me a very solid foundation of boomer classics. So I went from like very old school Hank Williams country all the way through the 60s and 70s, Donovan, the Beatles. And so I feel like I have a very solid foundation. However, I have educated my children beyond that about Sir Mix-a-Lot, LL Cool J, these kinds of things that from my childhood, the classics of my era.
Are you a Justin Timberlake person?
I do like Justin Timberlake. His first solo album, Justified, really one of the most surprising albums of my lifetime. It was widely acclaimed by everyone who expected it to be a dud because he was just this boy band guy, but he wasn't just this boy band guy. He was good.
Have you and Vic Mattis done your playlist podcast yet over at Getting Hammered?
We have not, and Dwayne has been requesting for, I would say, a decade now that I come to him and do a playlist podcast, and I have not yet done it. Sorry about that.
You need to do that. All right, I have two serious questions for you. First, I am in the middle of an interview with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, which I conducted yesterday, 80 minutes. It's over at my podcast. It's on my website, the video of it. What do you think of Dr. Jay?
I think he's a smart guy, and I appreciate anybody who cut against the mainstream sort of talking points and, in fact, bullying when it came to COVID. And now we're having this whole discussion about whether scientists are going to leave Twitter because people like Peter Hotez are being allegedly bullied by people who disagree with them. But the thing is that kind of figure is untrustworthy because he didn't tell the truth to people, right? They didn't actually weigh the data when we needed them to, and instead they decided to bully people, and that is why people now don't trust them. And no one ever deals with the original sin of the trust crisis when it came to COVID. And that's a big one.
That's what
Dr. J, someone I actually trust.
That's what I spent most of the time talking with him about, is how do you rebuild the public health system trust? And it's an 80-minute conversation. I'm not going to summarize it. But I do believe that if a Republican wins, we're going to see Dr. Jay Bhattacharya running NIH, CDC, or perhaps HHS. I really do believe that. And I think that would be a first step towards getting people to listen again, because he was an elegant, polite dissenter, and he put up with a lot of grief. And now, Mary Katherine, Hunter Biden, I have to ask you, what's your reaction? Now, he's an addict. I understand that. I know his family cares for him, but what do you think about this?
Look, I'm concerned not just with the taxes that he didn't pay or the gun charge. These things, I wonder whether I would get away with them and just get a plea deal. I do wonder that. What's also important to me is where the millions were coming from that he was not paying the taxes on. Meanwhile, I do think, despite the fact that he obviously has personal troubles, it is fine to be concerned that he's not only having problems himself, but he's traveling with the president. He's very close with the White House. He was staying at the place with the Corvette with classified documents. Like, it's okay to wonder whether this person being around and close and what he has access to might be a liability. In addition, he's not just doing the things to himself. He went to court this week to further his mission to disown this child that is biologically his, and to have his child support payments lowered so that he doesn't have to support her as much as he did in the past when he was making these millions of dollars from where we don't know. And so, no, I don't decline to criticize someone like that who is connected to power, who is doing a lot of bad things in a lot of areas. I think it's fair to have that discussion, and I wonder if he's being treated with kid gloves. And I think that's a fair thing to wonder.
Bill Barr said last night he expects Merrick Garland to make a defense of this. Do you? I don't. I don't think Merrick Garland is going to. Merrick Garland is going to be rarer than the groundhog in Patuxent.
I think it's wiser to stay with his mouth shut. I'd prefer he did the Trump version of this and just go out and talk about it everywhere and try to defend it. But I don't think he'll do that.
Are you going to be talking about this on Getting Hammered, Mary Catherine?
Yes, we are. The episode is out today. The news did us a favor by breaking before we recorded, so we can talk about Hunter Biden. Check it out.
Oh, Getting Hammered. Vic Mattis and Mary Catherine Ham talking Hunter Biden to your heart's content. Go and get that. Mary Catherine, have a great week. I'll be right back, America. I'm coming back. I'm going to play you the conclusion of my Amul Thapar interview. All of the Jay Bhattacharya interview is over at hughhewitt.com. The transcript is being compiled by Dwayne as we speak. The podcast yesterday had it all. I'm not going to play any more Jay today, but I am going to play the conclusion of my discussion with Judge Thapar in the third segment of this hour. Olivia Beavers coming along. Nikki Haley up today as well. Lots coming. Don't go anywhere. The news as it occurs always first right here on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Morning, Hunter Biden is waking up smiling, looking out the window at the White House and saying, slip the news, got away with it. Have to be on probation for a couple of years. I wonder if I can go back to China. Who knows what Hunter Biden is thinking, but America is thinking double standard. And I'm going to talk about it all day today on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
The penultimate case we're going to cover, and for the benefit of the Bengals fans, that doesn't mean the best, it means second to last. That's McDonald versus City of Chicago. And this is a 2010 case. I want everyone to know I teach this case every year that Thomas can. That doesn't mean the best, it means second to last. That's McDonald versus City of Chicago. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt on the first day of summer. I always play, and if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, you can't hear it. Frank Sinatra on the first day of summer. And I always call to mind, I've been doing this for 23 years, the best drive in America. It really is the best drive in America. You make a west turn off the 405, head over to Huntington Beach, and turn left and go down PCH. And you go by Surf City and the greatest pier in America. I like it better than Newport Beach Pier. And you cruise past everything. The happiest place on earth is Huntington Beach on a Saturday morning. Any Saturday morning that it's sunny at least. It can rain there. It rained most of the winter. You head on down to Newport Beach and you go by the greatest restaurant row in America. And roll on down through Corona Del Mar. Great stretch past Crystal Cove. Head through Laguna Beach. On down through South Laguna, Dana Point to the wonderful San Clemente. And it's all route El Camino Real. And the summer, I spent my first summer in California in 1978. And have loved every summer since then, 78, 79, every summer from 89 until 2023. I've spent a little bit. I won't be there at all this summer. This is an unfortunate thing, but when I was young and trying to persuade the fetching Mrs. Hewitt to remember my number, I would drive that road between Camp Pendleton and Encinitas and turn left head to Fallbrook where she was living, and thinking to myself, there's just no better place to live in the world than Southern California. It is truly tragic what's happened to the state. Governor Ron DeSantis did a very shrewd thing yesterday. He went out and he cut a selfie, dropped it in a video. I want you to watch this if you're on the Salem News Channel. He went to San Francisco. Now, I used to love to go to San Francisco fetching Mrs. Hewitt, and I would go there every couple of years. Last time we were there was whenever Hamilton debuted up there. I took her up for a Saturday afternoon matinee, and we stayed at a very nice hotel not far from Union Square. And we walked to the Playhouse, and we walked back. It was St. Patrick's Day because they were having the St. Patrick's Day parade. And we looked at each other, and we said, we don't think we're coming back. We don't like walking over people. Our hearts break for them. We don't like the syringes. We don't like the human excrement. We don't like the violence. We do not like the chaos. The doom loop had begun to unfurl. The last time we were there, which is probably 2017 or 18, it was after we had moved back to D.C., but we were back out there for a time. And here is Ron DeSantis in California talking about what he is witnessing. I'm looking for the right cut. It is cut number 14.
We're here in the once great city of San Francisco. We came in here and we saw people defecating on the street. We saw people using heroin. We saw people smoking crack cocaine. And you look around, the city is not vibrant anymore. It's really collapsed because of leftist policies. And these policies have caused people to flee this area. They don't prosecute criminals like they do in most parts of the country. And the wreckage has really, really been sad to see. And so I've seen so many businesses boarded up. I've seen so much riffraff just running around. And it just shows you these policies matter. Leadership matters. They are doing it wrong here. No wonder why we've had so many people move from San Francisco to Florida over the last few years. We got to stop this madness. We need to restore sanity to this country.
Ron DeSantis just nailed that, did he not? By the way, the other Republican governor who was nailing it is named Glenn Youngkin. Last night, Glenn Youngkin went 10 for 10. He backed 10 candidates in key races in the Virginia General Assembly and Senate primaries. Because Republicans hold the House in Virginia, but they don't hold the Senate, so they can't bring in universal school choice. They can't lower taxes as much as Glenn Youngkin wants to. He got a lot done in his first 2 years of governor, but he needs this new legislature in the fall, and he's throwing his all into the fall. If he ever gets ambitious for the presidency, it will only be after he wins the fall, and then he'll decide what to do. But he went 10 for 10 last night in the House and Senate races that he was particularly involved in. The House and Senate GOP caucuses had a great night, and the Virginia Democrats went off the left cliff. They nominated left-wing lunatic after left-wing lunatic in the Commonwealth. Now, I have fled California for the East Coast. I live on the East Coast now, north and south, Virginia to Maine. And I go back and forth. And I'll go to California every other year and teach at Chapman. And I still get my runs in at Huntington Beach. Still love to go. But I'm not going to live anywhere where governing is collapsing. Taxes are at 13.5%. Crime is skyrocketing. And the weather's changed. So it's not even the beautiful weather anymore because of climate change. We had the worst weather ever in 30-plus years of California winters this past winter. The worst ever, because it rained every day, and that was great for the state. It's great for the aquifer. It's great for the reservoir. It's great for the farmers, so I don't begrudge them 1 year out of 40, but Steinbeck's East of Eden begins. People always forget that it gets dry again, and then it rains, and when it's dry, people always forget it will rain again, but this was really just a kind of a nightmare year. The, quote, atmospheric rivers, new term, close quote, that, like polar, or what do they call those, polar vortexes? They come up with new terms at the Weather Channel to get you excited about stuff. But what I'm not excited about is what is happening in California. And Ron DeSantis is exactly right about that. We have a second Ron DeSantis in California, cut number 4.
I think that, I'm more likely to win the election against Joe Biden, which is very important. We just won Florida by 20 points, which no one thought was possible even a few years ago. I think I'm also more reliable on policy. When I say I'll do something, I will do it. And I think I'm more likely to actually get this stuff done. I mean, there have been promises made about draining the swamp, building the wall, doing all these things. None of that came to fruition. And I think in Florida, if you look at, I promised a whole bunch of things, and I delivered on all of the promises. In fact, we over-delivered. So right now, for example, Florida's the fastest growing state in the country. Number 1 for net in-migration, number 1 for new business formations. Our unemployment rate's a point less than the nation as a whole. And we have a massive budget surplus. We just did $2.7 billion in tax relief so Floridians can help cope with rising prices due to Biden's policies. And so I think we've got a great story to tell. And, I get in there on day one. There's going to be no distractions. We're not going to take our eye off the ball. We're going to be focused on the people's business, and we will get it done.
Ron DeSantis is 44 years old. He would be elected president at 45. He would be reelected at 49. He would be done at 53. I do think this is a quiet theme throughout. The not quiet theme throughout is what Chris Christie said yesterday on CBS Early Show, talking about former President Trump in the Fox News interview. I'm going to be playing the second part of the Fox News interview in the grand old pod today. It's only available to people who are subscribers to the universe. But Chris Christie, CBS last night, cut number 11.
Well, I mean, it's a horrible political and legal strategy. Because first off, last night he said the reason he didn't give the documents back was because he's just so very busy and he didn't have time to respond to a grand jury subpoena because he needed to get his golf shirts and pants out of the box. I mean, does anybody in America believe this?
Apparently so, right?
Well,
yes.
Look, I think the problem is going to be for him over time is that people are just not going to buy it. And when you think about how many days of golf he's played since he left office, maybe he could have skipped a couple of rounds of golf and gone through the boxes to respond to a subpoena from a grand jury. Look, the problem for Donald Trump in all of this is his own conduct. He's his own worst enemy. None of this would have happened to him or to the country if he had just returned the documents.
What about the reference to, Governor, these were newspaper articles? These weren't even documents. These were newspaper articles. As a former prosecutor, what do you make of that? How would you...
Oh, I've never heard about a newspaper article being declassified. I don't think you classify newspaper articles because, by definition, they're already public. So, look, I think he knows he's in trouble. And last night, I think the worst moment for him was that talking about the fact that he just didn't have time to go through these boxes. Well, in response to a grand jury subpoena, yet he told the government and had his lawyers certify that he had returned all of the documents that were responsive to the subpoena. That is obstruction of justice. And it appears to me last night, as a former prosecutor, that he admitted obstruction of justice on the air last night to Brett Baer. I can tell you this. his lawyers this morning are jumping out of whatever window they're near.
Huh! Chris Christie, one of the better, not a good interview as Donald Trump. Donald Trump remains the best interview in America, but Chris Christie is pretty close to putting his hands around the silver cup. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt from Studio North.
Unveil Evil in Nefarious, the modern Screwtape Letters. Praised by Pastor Jack Hibbs, Jim Caviezel, and Dinesh D'Souza. Rent it today on salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, Fifth Dimension Day. Why I just decided to play albums today. Welcome. It's a day for me that's a crazy travel day. I got to go down to the Beltway and come back late tonight. But 2 days ago, I interviewed Judge Amul Thapar about this book, Clarence Thomas' book, The People's Justice. And I can't recommend it strongly enough. I know a lot of you already bought it. If you missed it, you should. I want to finish the interview in this segment next before I think Ambassador Haley joins us in hour number 3, and Robert Harris, author extraordinaire, joins us as well. No update on the search for the missing submersible. They're still looking. They've still got some air. There's still hope. I'll keep you posted on that. Here is part 1 of the 2 parts of the conclusion of my interview with Judge Thapar about Clarence Thomas. That's McDonald versus City of Chicago. And this is a 2010 case. I want everyone to know I teach this case every year, the Thomas concurrence, because there's a very thorny thing for law students called what happened in the slaughterhouse cases, or why don't we apply the privileges or immunities clause of the 14th Amendment, instead use this incorporation thing. I don't know if you want to tackle that, Judge, but you did a fine job. That's why I want my law students to read this, because it will save me 3 days of teaching slaughterhouse and incorporation, which is very hard, but I want the reader to know you get it. But I teach it because in one opinion, Justice Thomas explains what went wrong and why he wants to go back to the privileges or immunities clause. You want to take a swing at this and tell us about Otis McDonald along the way? Because it takes him 6 brushes with criminality before he even thinks about buying a handgun.
Yeah. So Otis McDonald moves to Chicago for a better life, right? And he's a veteran. He goes into the military. He comes out of the military on the GI Bill. He uses the money to go to school and work at the same time so he can give his kids an easier life than he himself had. And Otis he gets married, has kids. They move to Morgan Park in the south side of Chicago, what once was a wonderful community, hopefully still is a wonderful community. But as the crime problem grows in Chicago, the crime goes out into Morgan Park. Drug dealers, everything, violence, and people start breaking into his home. First, he puts up bars. You've recounted 6 times. He puts up bars to try and stop them. He then puts in an alarm system to try and stop them. He joins community groups to try and stop him. He leads community groups to try and stop him. And the book recounts everything, including his brushes with gangs, and then what happens when his neighbor luckily calls the police when someone is under a car in his garage, hiding under a car, had broken in and was coming into the house. And he finally says enough is enough. The police aren't going to get there soon enough. And he thought very highly of the police, but they just weren't going to make it there quick enough. If someone was inside his house, he was adamant that he was going to protect his wife and kids. All of his kids, by the way, became successful in their own right. He needed a handgun. He needed a gun by his bed in case someone broke in, because by the time the police got there, it would be too late.
Can I interrupt you for a second, Judge? One of the elegant parts of the People's Justice is that you recount each of his incidents with lawbreakers, and you discuss how neighborhood kids would break into his house. And I think it's important to realize that the choice to buy a handgun here is predicated only on a half dozen brushes that might have cost he or his family their lives. So he is a reluctant gun purchaser, but Chicago doesn't care what your record is. Go ahead, Judge.
Yeah, and what happens next is he's denied the right to possess a gun. Here's a veteran who knew how to use guns. He hunted some in his free time, and not that he had a lot, but when he did. And yet Chicago wouldn't let him have it. So he wanted to challenge the gun laws of Chicago, yet Heller hadn't been announced. And so, and I won't go through that, but the book recounts the interesting story of how he got teamed up with Alan Gura and how he had to wait, and he wasn't happy waiting. And he has this nephew who's a lawyer who really does a great job counseling Otis and teaching him, be patient. And you know what Otis does? He reads all the decisions. Yeah. He goes through and reads all these decisions, and he learns about the privileges or immunities clause. And what he
And
learned is
15 minutes after Heller has decided they file. I love that. I didn't know that. Stop right there. 15 minutes after Heller has decided they filed McDonald versus City of Chicago. And I'll continue and conclude the interview with Judge Thapar after this break to remind you that we're in the ReliefFactor.com studio, and I took my ReliefFactor.com this morning, and you ought to too. And that means if you have to do what I do, fly back and forth today and deal with the dreaded overhead bin twice, always the enemy of all shoulders and backs, then ReliefFactor.com is your friend. Now, I had to transfer my Beach to Beacon membership to my son. I was going to run the 10K. The knee will not ungimp by then enough. But ReliefFactor.com is helping it get there, and it certainly is helping me just stay moving and active and going and trundling at a slower and less distant way. But I want to tell you, it's not a solution to everything. It's not going to heal a broken arm. It's not going to get rid of a slipped disc. But the minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging are remediable and can be alleviated if you take your ReliefFactor.com every day, like 500,000 Americans do. Because it's Icariin, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements that supplement your body's natural anti-inflammatory system, and that is what makes it so wonderful. Don't delay another day. Go out there and spend the $19.95 and try it for 3 weeks and see if it works for you like it does for me and those 500,000 other people. 7 out of 10 people keep taking Relief Factor forever. I'm among them. I hope you are too. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The conclusion of Judge Thapar interview next. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Judge Amul at the bar, one of the bright, shining stars on the Sixth Circuit, rising up in the federal judiciary, found time to write maybe the second best book about Clarence Thomas, the best being his autobiography, My Grandfather's Son. This new book, The People's Justice by Amul Thapar, should be on every shelf of everyone, written for laymen. Let's go to the conclusion of my interview, which I recorded Monday with Judge Thapar. 15 minutes after it comes down, they file McDonald. Go ahead, tell them about this nightmare of law.
Well, Otis wasn't going to be patient, Hugh. Otis was ready for it to be filed and wanted it to be filed. But the Privileges or Immunities Clause, and the book recounts it, and I don't want to give away too much, but it recounts the Crookshank and the slaughterhouse, all that, what went on. And I think the reader, I want to save this nugget, Hugh, so people go out and get The People's Justice and read it, because I think it will educate and hopefully...
Very much.
Yeah, and I think people will really enjoy the read. But how the Crookshank, how the Privileges or Immunities Clause was put in the 14th Amendment to protect blacks. Why? Because after the Civil War, what were passed were black codes in the South to deny black people guns. And that was the ability to protect themselves. And here was the grandson of slaves, Otis McDonald, trying to rectify that the Privileges or Immunities Clause, which was supposed to allow blacks to participate in equal footing and give them the privileges or immunities of the United States, which included their gun rights, had been eradicated by the Supreme Court, had been written out of the Constitution.
I want people to read it so they get that background. You know, it is as relevant. Tomorrow, Vivek Ramaswamy is on, and Vivek attempted to educate a television host on how the black codes prevented blacks from having firearms, and the television host wasn't having anything of being shown up by a young man who actually knew what he was talking about. And if that television host had read The People's Justice, they would not have embarrassed themselves and they would still have their job. I don't expect you to comment on that, Judge. That's why I'm bringing it up. I just want people to understand that this debate about the black codes and blacks having guns is fully and carefully explicated by Judge Thapar in The People's Justice. I want to finish, Judge, and honor your time and my audience's time with his dissent, Justice Thomas's dissent in Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association. I bring this up, and again, I'm not asking you to comment on cases that might come before the court involving parental choice. I bring it up because parental choice on matters of sexual dysphoria, etc., and school is everywhere in the news every day. And parental rights is everywhere in the news every day. Justice Thomas weighed in on the originalist view of parental rights. You are not adopting this view, but you are relaying it. Now tell us about Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association, because I honestly had never read his dissent until I read The People's Justice.
Yeah, so can I comment on Vivek? Because he
Yes.
is from Cincinnati, you know, so you're having back-to-back days, Bengals.
Yeah, he's wrong, too, about football. Yes, I know. We've done that before. The poor man raised in the wrong place. Can't help. But go ahead.
Yeah. So back to Brown. Brown was a case where violent video games were posing a problem, and the people of California wanted to give, especially single parents, the right to veto their child's purchases of video games. And so what California did, and it was a bipartisan effort, they teamed up and they passed a law that allowed, that all it did is required before a child could buy a violent video game, meaning someone under 18, they had to get their parents' permission. Kind of like going into an R movie or anything like that. But
Or getting a tattoo.
I'm sorry?
Getting a tattoo requires usually parental consent if you're under 18.
Getting married, going into
Yep.
the Army, all kinds of
Yep.
things require parental consent. That's all this was parental consent law. Well, immediately the Video Game Association challenged it. And a district judge, the book recounts the story of the lead up to the Supreme Court, so I'll skip to the Supreme Court, but it's really fascinating, and it's really fascinating who was watching video games and what they were doing. I recount at the beginning of the book, the beginning of the chapter, the Columbine case, the horrific case out of Colorado, and how the two evil devil's children went in and shot up that school, but were playing a video game. And it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And Justice Thomas takes a look at the original Constitution and what happened at the founding and what parental rights were. And he recounts in detail, and it's not only worth reading the book, but it's worth then, after you have a flavor and read all that, to go pick up his dissent. Because while I try and capture what he was doing, it's detailed, and he provides a thorough history of parental rights there and points out that at the founding, you didn't have a right to speak to someone's child. Your right to free speech and the video game maker's right to free speech may exist, but they don't have a right to speak to your 7-year-old without your permission. In fact, as the chapter recounts, parents were very involved in education and all sorts of things with their children, and even what was taught in the schools was run through the parents in some sense. Think of the boards over schools that are usually manned and womaned by parents. And so if you look at the history, there was no question that Justice Thomas was right about parental rights. Interestingly, the court split, not along typical lines there. Justice Breyer had a really thoughtful dissent, and I recount that.
Pragmatic as always, right? Pragmatic Justice Breyer.
But here's what we had. We had a teaming up of pragmatism and an appendix, right? Justice Thomas isn't the only one who includes appendixes. Justice Breyer put an appendix in. A different chapter has Justice Thomas putting an appendix in with a picture, and I'll leave that for them to get the book and read it. But this one, Justice Breyer includes an appendix with all the articles and studies showing what violent video games does to kids. And so the 1-2 punch of Breyer and Thomas is pretty compelling.
On parents' rights, it's dispositive, I think, on video games. Judge, I want to conclude. I've got a colleague on Chapman's faculty, James Phillips, who is one of the leading large language model originalists. They are now putting everything that was written before the Constitution was ratified during it, and then everything before each of the amendments into bases. They're using large language models and AI to determine. What do you make of that approach generally, not specifically? Because James has persuaded me it's legit. Now, he's brilliant, and I don't ever want him to leave Chapman, but he's going to end up being on the bench somewhere. What do you think of large language models trying to get to the originalism at the time, the public meaning at the time of adoption of the Constitution or a statute?
You know, I think anything that can help us, I think they're all tools that can help judges and others and lawyers and even lay people figure out the original meaning of the Constitution. I'm more than willing to look at anything that is included to help me figure it out, as I think Justice Thomas is, as he goes through in that chapter about parental rights. He goes through all kinds of sources that existed at the founding. And so I think it's really important that judges be open to help in any way to figure out the original meaning of the Constitution so that we can get it right.
Let me quote from that chapter. You quote Justice Thomas saying, "It would be absurd," he said, "to think founders guaranteed a right to speak to a minor without parents' consent." Quote, "The founding generation believed parents had absolute authority over their minor children." That's on page 172. That's a defense of parental consent laws. Now, that's not Judge Thapar's opinion, that's Justice Thomas's opinion, but I think it's not actually up for debate. That's what they believed. It may have been modified in various places over the years that you would have to account for, but he begins with what the public meaning was at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. I think it's persuasive, and my bottom line, Judge, I think he scares people because as a dissenter, he's taken over the Scalia job of changing the law 30 years from now, not tomorrow. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, Justice Thomas is always willing to say, here's the path we have to follow to get back to the original meaning. And a lot of people that criticize him don't realize he's not saying that doesn't mean if it's not found in the Constitution, you don't have it. In fact, Justice Thomas believes we retain all of our rights except those that were specifically given up in signing the document and allowing the government to regulate us. And what's more, he thinks states can do all sorts of things, and the legislature, if they properly do it through bicameralism and presentment, Congress signs it and the president doesn't veto it, it can become law as long as it complies with the Interstate Commerce Clause. But check out Chapter 4 about his view on that.
Oh, I love Chapter 4 because I hate teaching the Dormant Commerce Clause as well. Judge, you've been very generous with your time. I want to ask you one personal question. You obviously love to write and to think and to debate, and you're a public intellectual. But I've always told people I could never have been on the bench because I couldn't yammer all day long. How much of an imposition is it on Amul Thapar not to talk politics?
It's a big imposition, but we talk at lunchtime with my law clerks. It's always fun. We can banter about anything as long as they don't attack the Bengals. They're fine, and they can attack any of my views, and we can debate them. And it's a ton of fun. But I like staying out of the political realm to some extent because it gives me freedom to do all these other things.
Well, I want to congratulate you on a fabulous book, The People's Justice. By the way, you're not going to find many blurbs that include Attorney General Meese, Attorney General Barr, Molly Hemingway, Laura Ingraham, Megyn Kelly. This is really remarkable number of blurbs, and they love the book. And congratulations, Judge. I know you probably have a tough media schedule in the next few days. Good luck in walking the tightrope between talking about the law and not talking about politics. You did it very well today. Congratulations on The People's Justice. I hope to see you again.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
Judge Thapar is really one of the superstars of the federal judiciary. There's another hit piece on another justice today by ProPublica, and it's another nothing burger. This time they're going after Alito. It is a well-financed effort to destroy the legitimacy of the court so that if Democrats win the Senate and the presidency again, they can pack the court and destroy the rule of law. And I have been saying it. I would oppose any Republican attempt to expand the court. I will oppose any Democratic attempt to expand the court. It will destroy the rule of law. What we have now is the first constitutionalist majority of my lifetime, with 6 people who begin from the premise that the Constitution, if it can be understood to apply, must be applied as it was understood by the public at the time it was adopted or the amendments were adopted, or statutes must be read as Congress intended them to be understood at the time that they were adopted. And this majority matters. It's got to be protected. Coming back with Olivia Beavers. Sad news during the break is that Nikki Haley has laryngitis and will not join me at the top of next hour. So we will continue to talk about Hunter Biden. First with Olivia Beavers from Politico, and then with you. My phone number is 1-800-520-1234. If you want to hear all of the Judge Thapar interview from start to finish, that's over at Highly Concentrated Hugh, as is the entire interview with Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford. I played an excerpt of that. Podcast is always there. Sign up for it, review it, and then over at HughHewitt.com and get the newsletter every day. And, of course, everything that matters happens is over there. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. If Olivia Beavers of Politico knows anything about the fifth dimension, I will fall over in my chair. Olivia Beaver joined me from Politico. Good morning, Olivia. Do you know anything about the fifth dimension?
Was it a song back in the day?
It was a group. I knew it. Thank goodness I don't have to fall into my chair. Olivia is one of my favorite guests because A, her lighting is perfect. B, she's always happy. And she sends me notes before an interview about what she's working on, which makes it actually fabulous for the host. Olivia, I am fascinated by this source close to the House oversight investigation who is chatting with you. Explain to the audience what you picked up about Hunter Biden.
Yes, Hugh. So essentially, the Hunter Biden news that broke yesterday, my colleague reported that essentially their charges against him are intended to be a comprehensive resolution to his potential legal liability in all matters investigated by federal authorities, which means they're done looking at his business with foreign entities. But that is definitely not true with House Republicans who say, we think that there's still something here. We're going to keep pushing forward. James Comer went into the House SCIF. It's a secure location and basically reviewed a doc that the FBI was providing. And he emerged quite unhappy, basically saying there were too many redactions. Some of the information that he wanted to see, some underlying documents weren't there. And so I'm told that he basically had a phone call with Jim Jordan, and they were trying to discuss ways forward. They're still debating whether to hold FBI Director Chris Wray in contempt, unless he can sort of appease them with these document requests. But they are also looking to bring in Weiss, who, if you remember, is that Trump attorney who was looking into Hunter Biden. And I guess that they want to be drilling into him about why he did decide to not look more into the foreign business dealings. And there's also something else. They are looking to bring in Devin Archer, and I think we're going to be seeing him within the next 7 to 10 days, this source tells me. And Archer was a close business associate of Hunter Biden, so they're going to probably be drilling into him about any, relation that Hunter Biden might have with Burisma and the money that he got there.
Yeah, no, Olivia, yesterday, U.S. Attorney Weiss said the investigation is ongoing. That was a printed statement. Kyle Cheney, your colleague, has reported this was intended to be a four corners deal to wrap up all of Hunter Biden's liability. It is possible that both those things are true, in that Hunter Biden's plea is contingent upon cooperation in matters concerning people like Devin Archer. Have you heard if House oversight has been warned off from these hearings by the DOJ as improvidently held because they'll interfere with the prosecution, or are they full speed ahead in the House?
They're full speed ahead as far as I know, but they might still get that warning. I know that James Comer now is going to be pushing the FBI and DOJ to be clear what documents relate to ongoing investigations, because that was sort of what they kept running into. They wanted a document and they would get the pushback from the government saying, this is part of it's not classified, but it's part of an ongoing investigation, so it's redacted for whatever reasons. And he was feeling frustrated, being like, well, what ongoing investigations are there then? If you've already made charges, I should be able to see the underlying evidence related to this. So I think you're going to start seeing a whole new approach to their fight between House Republicans and the DOJ in terms of what documents they can get on Hunter Biden, too.
When do they bring in Hunter Biden?
That's a good question. I know that they want to. I don't know when.
When do they bring in Jim Biden?
Man, you're killing me with these questions.
Well, I mean, this is, to me, the obvious thing is Devin Archer, Hunter Biden, Jim Biden, and then you've got the investigation where you want it. Who's the guy, Bobolaski? They got to bring him in. Has he already been in?
My understanding is not, but I think that they're all sort of building up to that point. You build up the evidence pool, and Comer is still working to try to connect. He hasn't publicly produced evidence to suggest that the president was involved in the bribery allegations that are out there.
No, he hasn't. He hasn't.
Yeah.
I do know. I'm going to open up the phone. Nikki Haley's got laryngitis, so I was going to talk to Nikki Haley next hour. She can't talk. So I'm going to open up the phones and ask the public what they think about this. What is the general reaction? We have a minute, Olivia. Just generally around the Politico newsroom to the Hunter Biden deal.
I think that there's long been believed. If you looked at like the gun form with him checking the box that he hadn't been charged with a federal crime, everyone could see that that one was coming from a long ways away. I think that there's long sort of been seen that the stuff that Hunter Biden was in is fishy. So I don't know that there was a ton of surprise that that resulted in a charge. But I think you're dealing, and I'll say it quickly, right now we're looking at the Donald Trump charges, we're looking at the Hunter Biden charges and questions about how the justice system works or doesn't work, or if it's fair and how it's applied. And I think that that's sort of the broader debate that reporters are also interested in is, what did Hunter Biden get off easy? Did Donald Trump, was he treated fairly?
I'm interested in other defendants who face the same set of charges who went to prison. They're the people I'm interested in, and I think we're going to hear from them in the days and weeks ahead. Olivia_Beavers, that's where you follow her on Twitter. You read her at Politico. It's always joy to see you in the morning, Olivia. Thank you for joining me as always. Happy, fresh-faced, and full of light. We got to get Mary Katherine to light her studio bed here, but Olivia's is really well lit. I will be right back. Your phone calls, 1-800-520-1234.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. On this Wednesday morning, Hunter Biden is waking up smiling, looking out the window at the White House and saying, slip the news, got away with it. Have to be on probation for a couple of years. I wonder if I can go back to China. Who knows what Hunter Biden is thinking, but America is thinking double standard. And I'm going to talk about it all day today on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Morning Glory, America. Bones are high. Canada. Hugh Hewitt live inside Studio North. I'll be jetting down to the Beltway after the show today. Do some business. Be back up tonight. But the big story is, of course, Hunter Biden's sweetheart deal. And we have Hunter Biden's lawyer went into the Lion's Den on MSNBC yesterday with Katie Tur to denounce the idea that it was a sweetheart deal. Here is Chris Clark, Hunter Biden's lawyer, with Katie Tur on MSNBC yesterday, cut number 1.
I want to get to what's fair and what the GOP is saying in a moment, but I'm hoping that you can bring us into the room when you reached this plea agreement with prosecutors. Did you sense that they were happy to be done with it, that there was frustration? What can you tell us about the negotiation to get to this point?
I don't think it's appropriate to talk about my conversations with my adversaries. What I can tell you is, they were very diligent, very dogged. This was, it took 5 years, and it was 5 years of work that they put in. And even throughout working out the ultimate resolution, I think that they were always driving for what they thought was fair.
5 years. NBC reports at times this was a counterintelligence investigation, that this was an investigation to FARA violations, which is how you register to work with a foreign government if you're an American citizen. Money laundering. Again, 5 years, and what they came up with is 2 misdemeanor tax counts.
That's the resolution we have, is that Mr. Biden's going to take responsibility.
What I want you to understand is that Robert Mueller took 2 years, and they came up with nothing. Nada. Zip. But the way you present that on MSNBC is very different from the way you present the Hunter Biden. 5 years, and they looked into all this stuff. The implication from Katie is that, oh my gosh, there's nothing there. That's the implication. Cut number 2.
For defamation, if one was to be pursued, is there a case for illegal dissemination of personal information?
We just finished the 5-year DOJ investigation.
I can't even believe that question. Now, I like Katie. Katie's been a guest on this show. She was a colleague. I don't talk bad about Katie. But why did Hunter Biden's lawyer go on with Katie Tur? Ask yourself that. Why? 1-800-520-1234. Of course it's a sweetheart deal. Of course people with similar convictions and pleas go to jail, and Hunter Biden's going to skate. Maybe he wears an ankle bracelet from the second floor of the White House with the right to leave during. I don't know if he gets to travel with his dad and do more dirty deals with the Chinese and the Ukrainians. I don't know, but what do you think? 1-800-520-1234. It's a talk show. Jeff in Pennsylvania, what do you think?
Well, since we know the FBI is corrupt by their actions, stonewalling, hiding documents, redacting documents, what is Comer and Jordan and Grassley doing in terms of getting the best legal minds to combat the corruption?
All right, now, great question. First of all, Senator Grassley and the Republicans in the Senate have no power. Zero. All they can do is ask questions of witnesses who have been summoned by the Democratic majority. And that's why we have to take the House back, why we need to win in West Virginia and Montana and Ohio and Arizona and Nevada. Those are the 5 targets. And take the Senate back so that the subpoenas can come. But what Congressman Chairman Comer and Congressman Chairman Jordan can do is they're going to bring in Devin Archer, as you just heard Olivia Beavers report. They're going to bring in Tony Bobulinski. Then they're going to bring in Hunter Biden, and they're going to bring in Jim Biden. And, everything will be new again. They'll have a new violation of statute. But look, this is a dummied up DOJ. And I'm sure Andrew Weiss is going to say he was not influenced by this. But I do not believe any other person in America would get this. And the idea that Hunter Biden has been slandered or defamed or adverse possession of his laptop, that is on Katie's mind. I mean, if that's on your mind, feel free to tell me that. Debbie in Finland. Are you really in Finland, Debbie?
Yes, I am. I'm right on the water's edge in Finland.
Are you Finnish?
My husband is Finnish.
Did you watch Veep?
I watched the part I looked up the part that you said was funny, yes.
I love the Finnish prime minister or president in Veep. That's what I always think of when I've only been to Finland a couple of times. How's the weather there? I hope it's sunny all day long.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's sunny and warm, and I mean they consider it hot at 80, but it's been beautiful weather.
And they're seating a new right-wing government today. I read in the Daily Chatter that they've got the new coalition in Ola. What a surprise there. It's going to be the new prime minister. Are you happy with that?
Well, it's funny. My husband's not very political as far as in Finland. We actually lived in part-time in the U.S. and this is more like vacation.
Okay, but where are you in Turku?
Yes, we have a boat here, and
are you going to go in the sauna?
Whenever we can, yes.
Okay.
It's wonderful.
Well, what does a Finnish caller? You're my first Finnish caller, by the way. So this is the first in 23 years of the show. I've never had a call from Finland before. I was unaware that the show reached there via the interwebs, but I'm glad. What's your opinion of the Hunter Biden laydown deal?
Well, I think it's terrible. I think it's just it's funny. It seems that justice and all that is actually a lot better in Finland as far as you trust the government and trust the judicial system much more now than the U.S. It's sad. It's sad. But what I was going to say as far as taxes, now Hunter Biden made, $1.5 million each of those 2 years? And his tax obligation was...
How did he make the money is the obvious question. It's so obvious he was representing somebody. Somebody was paying him for something, and we don't know. It's astonishing.
What about this fair taxation? Because he paid $100,000. His obligation was $100,000 each year. That's less than 10%.
I don't understand that either because obviously he wasn't a resident of California because he'd owe that much on the California state income taxes. Actually, he'd owe more. Debbie, that's a great question. I appreciate it. Enjoy the land of the midnight sun. Get a sauna, get in the boat, and keep calling. Let me talk with Michael in Atlanta, Georgia next. Hello, Michael, from Finland to Atlanta. How are you?
Great, Hugh. How you doing?
I'm great. Always happy talking to a Finn.
What I wanted to say about the Hunter Biden situation, I actually, if you look at the timing, so forth, what's going on, especially with Trump, I actually believe that this may be this sweetheart deal could be a negotiation with the DOJ to pressure Joe Biden not to run. I think the Democratic establishment has had enough with him, and I think that this probably, if they can just wash this away, this could be a situation where Joe just walks away and another candidate comes on in.
You know, I don't think that's the case. I think Joe's going to have to be driven from the field, but I think it will impact his approval rating. I mean, this is so nasty. This smells so bad. It just stinks. And Andrew Weiss probably thought, I can't charge him in the middle of the election. That will impact the election. I want nothing to do with being James Comey or being Jack Smith. I just want to get away from this as soon as possible. And so let's charge him and let it go. That's my guess. I don't know. They're going to bring in Weiss and talk about this decision. James Comer, thank gosh we've got the House. We'll get some answers, but it just stinks. Thank you, Michael. Ricardo, Tennessee. How are you, Ricardo? What do you think?
Hey, Wednesdays, I'll be quick. So first of all, two charges. Let's look at each one. I can understand where the prosecuting attorney on the drug charge might take a plea deal because he has to prove that he was on drugs at the time. He has to prove those were drugs in the videos. Reasonable doubt and all that. I get that part of it, right? And you could argue that the reason he hasn't been in trouble before, that's a whole different discussion. But in this probation, is it a supervised probation or is he drug tested is my question. If not, it's an easy deal. Now,
that's interesting, Ricardo. We're going to run out of time, so let me just say, I would like to know the answer to that. Whether or not he will be drug tested every 3 months for his probation, but we're not going to get any answer. They're going to dummy up, roll over, and say it's got nothing to do with the president. I've already seen the leftists. This will I definitely won't be voting for Hunter Biden again. It's just astonishing to me that anyone thinks we don't all see what's going on here. Everybody sees it. It's like the emperor's old clothes, right? Everybody sees it. Everybody, or a Geico ad. Don't say anything. Everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. There goes Hunter Biden with the blue hair. Everybody sees, you have blue hair. We all see it. Double standard of justice. We all see it. Thank you, Ricardo. 1-800-520-1234. Connection to me, Hugh Hewitt. Call.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Welcome back, America. I'm just using albums for playlist. This is the Fifth Dimension from 1969, The Age of Aquarius. It's an earwig for the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I. At dinner last night, we heard Bill, and we hadn't heard it forever, and now can't get it out of our head. I want you to go over to Hugh Hewitt on Twitter and see that I have retweeted a Larry O'Connor retweet of Greta Van Susteren, because Greta went and found a comparison shot from the New York Post. Look what they got, jail time for similar crime. The Hunter Biden sweetheart deal is going to tick off a lot of people who know anyone who went to jail for anything less than this. I mean, people go to jail for what Hunter Biden did, and he gets a slap on the wrist. It's impossible to believe it's other than sweetheart deal for the president's kid. Now, before I get more phone calls in, I do want to remind you, AndrewandTodd.com are sponsors of our show. They were Sierra Pacific Mortgage, old friend of mine. I've known Andrew for 20 plus years. Andrew Todd half that time. Their phone number is 888-888-1172. Sierra Pacific Mortgage helps you get a loan because they're a bank, and they check you out. They tell you how much you can borrow. They tell you how much you can afford in a house. Yesterday, the Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University put out their annual State of the Nation's Housing Report. It's not great news for people who want to buy a house. There are fewer younger buyers who can afford to purchase real estate. Home prices began to dip recently a little bit. That's existing home prices. But they shot up 37.5% between February 2020 and February 2023. So if you owned a home before February of 2020, or any time in that first year of COVID lockdown, you made money on your house, but everybody who didn't have a house got locked out. Mortgage rates were below 3% during most of the COVID-19 pandemic. They are now in the high 6% range, and indeed they're 7% for many people. This explains why the number of first-time home buyers who took out mortgages dropped 22% last year. Just in the last quarter of 2022, first-time buyers took out 40% fewer mortgages than they did a year earlier. So people can't buy houses. They can't afford to. But here's the secret. Maybe you can, and maybe you haven't looked in the right place, and maybe you haven't considered a 2-1 or a 3-1 buy down, or an ARM has come back into the market. These interest rates will come down, but you got to go check with AndrewandTodd.com to find out how. Give them a call, 888-888-1172. Let me run through some calls here. 30-second rule is in effect. Jack in Florida. 30 seconds, Jack.
Yes, sir, I agree. Anybody breaks the law needs to pay the price. But, you know, it seems like it's with all these politicians. It's Hunter Biden, it's Trump, it's all of them.
Sweetheart deals for everyone. Well, Hunter's is the sweetest of the sweethearts. Thank you, Jack. Eli in Florida. Go ahead, Eli. What say you? 30 seconds.
Well, you look at the last names of the lawyers that helped out that Biden guy, and then they're all connected with different things that are going deeper into all that.
I don't know anything about Chris Clark. I really don't. But I do know he got, I've been in some plea negotiations before, and they don't take 5 years unless you've strung out your defense and you're getting help from the prosecution. They don't put it up with it. They just don't. You make a deal and you pay the price, and Hunter did neither for 5 years. It's an unbelievable deal. Thanks, Eli. John, Divide, Colorado. Hello, John. How are you? 30 seconds, friend.
Hello, Hugh. Much like the 1760s or the 1850s, the ties that bind peoples together is more like Gulliver than one big cable. The belief in a single system of justice for all is a huge thread that ties us together. Severing it is very dangerous, very bad, and you can hear it pop this week.
Yeah, the rule of law is, Donald Trump just got hit with a trial date in August. Now, that's not going to hold. Rusty Ricardo, my man on the ground in Miami, says, yeah, she's got a rocket docket and a reputation for moving fast in that district. Maybe. I don't see it. I think it's too complicated to go that fast. But they're trying to just think about it. 5 years they screwed around and fiddled with Hunter and gave him a sweetheart deal. It's been a year since they served the first ever subpoena on a former president, and they won an August trial. Just think about it. It's incredible. And John, I don't. You're right. I don't think people believe in the single standard of justice anymore.
Very, very, very dangerous thing.
It is. Thank you, friend. I always like hearing from John. John is a smart guy. Someday I'll get the divide. ReliefFactor.com. I already took it today because I'm doing the dreaded overhead bin twice, early and late. Got to fly down to D.C., got a meeting today talking about AM radio with people. Got to save AM radio. I'm an AM radio warrior. You might be listening to me on FM. You might be listening to me from WGAN in Portland down to KCBQ in San Diego, and from Florida to Washington State. I cover the country, and Finland apparently this morning, thanks to AM radio. And the more important thing is not me, but it's I got to go do the job to make sure people keep AM radio alive. But ReliefFactor.com keeps me doing my job and keeps me going, moving, because I believe in that. I just would be bored sitting around. I like to read a good book better than anybody, but you got to keep moving. And to keep moving and do these one-day trips, you need ReliefFactor.com just to stay nimble and not deal with the dreaded overhead bin, which is the source of more, I think, elbow, shoulder, and back problems than I ever. People take down these enormous, I try and help people. They put up like 5,000 pounds opposed to a backpack, which I'm traveling with today. And no wonder they get screwed. But ReliefFactor.com will help you if you've done something that dumb. ReliefFactor.com. For dumb people who do dumb things, and for other people who exercise, and everyone who's getting older, ReliefFactor.com. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for tuning in. This is a two birds with one stone couple of segments. You often hear me say this is late Roman Republic stuff, and I'm hoping that you have muscle memory back to my long series on Plutarch and Tacitus with Dr. Larry Arnn, or my various conversations with people about Roman history when I say late Roman Republic stuff. But I also like in the summer, on the first day of summer, to introduce you to a new author. And one of my favorite reads is a fellow by the name of Robert Harris, who's never been on the show before. Now, you might have met Vince Flynn for the first time on this show, or Ken Follett, or Bernard Cornwell. Robert, welcome. It is good to see you. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Hi, very good to see you too, Hugh.
Now, you're a Cambridge man, and I think like William Dalrymple and Ken Follett, you're a man of the left. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Broadly speaking, they're my sympathies, yes.
No, that's fine. We're not talking politics today. We're talking about the late Roman Republic. I want people to read the Cicero trilogy so they'll understand. Even people who will not sit down with a history book will read a great novel. And the Cicero trilogy is what I want to talk to you about today. Has it got legs? Do people keep reading it? Like, I just discovered it fairly recently. I read Fatherland like 15, 20 years ago, but I didn't know about your Cicero trilogy. How does that do?
It does pretty well. It's just come out a year or so ago in the UK in a single volume, so it's a big book, over 1,000 pages when it's all together, because there are 3 novels, and that's the same in Italy and in Holland. One of the problems in the States with the Cicero trilogy is that it's 2 volumes were published by Simon and Schuster, and a 3rd volume by Knopf. So it's sort of a bit split, but it's still out there. The novels can be read on their own, but it's best to read them in sequence. It begins with Imperium, and then Conspirata, and then Dictator, and it traces. Volume 1 is the rise of Cicero. Volume 2 is Cicero in power, and Volume 3 is Cicero's fall from power, and the familiar story of the assassination of Julius Caesar and all that.
Well, I thought it was fabulous. By the way, whoever reads, it's very tricky. If you're an audiobook enthusiast, as I am, it's very tricky to find all 3 because they switch. Not only do they switch publishers, they switch audio producers for the 3rd book, but the narration is fabulous and the books are fabulous. And I don't give that compliment out very often because I'm kind of serious about Roman history. I read the real thing as well as the adapted novels like yours and before yours, Colleen McCullough. But a lot of people won't do the hard work, especially as they get older, but they'll read a good novel, and this introduces them to what the phrase late Roman Republic means. Now, Robert Harris, when you hear me say that what's going on in the United States today is late Roman Republic stuff, what does that mean to you, given that you actually know your late Roman Republic stuff?
What it means to me is that you can't take for granted an ancient form of democracy, that it's constantly under attack. The Romans had a form of democracy. Okay, women couldn't vote. It was biased in favor of the rich and so on. But still, it was an astonishing form of democracy with annual elections. And they'd had it for centuries, longer actually than America has existed. And a supposition of people like Cicero was that it would always exist. And in 25 years, the whole thing collapsed. And so for me, the novels have a kind of parallel with democracy, not just in the United States, but all across the world. That is, that it's not the natural state of men and women to live in democracies, actually. And they can easily be overtaken. And there are many parallels in what happened to the ancient Roman Republic with what we see going on today.
I agree with this, and I don't want to be facile. I want to say that I think democracy is very sturdy. The Constitution is a very, very reliable document. The British Constitution continues to function quite well. But over the course of 25 years, if you abandon the custom and the self-restraint upon which democracy is based, you end up with not just the Gracchi, but you end up with the first triumvirs and the second triumvirs. And poor people like Cicero stand in the middle trying to get people to pretend the rule of law matters, and it all collapses around them. So what alarms you the most in the current setting that makes you... let me ask this. Who strikes you as a Cicero-like figure on either side of the Atlantic right now?
Hard to see anyone with that degree of intelligence. I mean, Cicero was a cunning and practical politician at the same time as being a philosopher and a brilliant orator. Such people we don't seem to see in politics anymore. And they were becoming rare in the Roman Republic, which was filled with a lot of pretty inadequate people who were running the show by the time you got to around kind of 50, 60 BC. So I think that the fundamental thing is that the Roman constitution was designed for a relatively small power, a citizen's kind of state, really, a city-state, and that it became a huge empire, and it had standing armies, and it had a huge military infrastructure. And this kind of buckled the power system. People could become enormously rich. Pompey had the whole of the Eastern Mediterranean really financing him, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar had the whole of France, Gaul as it was then called, supporting him. So these were two immensely wealthy men, and they really bought elections. And the whole political process became mired in litigation for months, sometimes years. Consuls, who were elected annually, 2 of them at any one time, to run the country, they couldn't take office because there was so much legal stuff going on. And the other thing is that people no longer agreed what the Republic was for. And I think that that's one of the things that I find most striking now. There was no consensus as to why exactly this institution existed. What was the function of the country and the Republic? What was it supposed to do? And that was lost. So therefore people just were willing to do anything for their side to win. There was no consensus of preserving the state.
That's it. No limit on what you will do to win. Now, I wrote a column for the Washington Post not long ago. I don't know if it ever showed up on your Google search, in which I mentioned your Cicero trilogy. As I'm not really worried about a late Roman Republic resort to violence because we haven't got standing armies running around behind Sulla. And Caesar's not going to come back from Gaul with a few legions behind him to cross the Rubicon. But these massive concentrations of wealth are real. And they do have a parallel with the massive concentrations of wealth that Pompey and Crassus and others accumulated prior to that. The deployment of the wealth now doesn't build armies, it builds online presences. Has that occurred to you that that's the parallel that we have to worry about?
Yes, definitely. I'm afraid that I agree with you. Really what brought down the Roman Republic was unscrupulous billionaires who posed as being anti-establishment and whipped up the masses to, in fact, literally storm the Capitol in ancient Roman Republican times. And there was a constant process of belittling every institution so that everybody lost faith in the Senate. They thought, the Senate was just corrupt. And so they were licensed to burn it down, which is what they literally did. And so there was this constant underlying uneasiness and a kind of demagoguery. And in the end, nothing can withstand this. I'm also very...
Yeah, Robert Harris, it's been 50 years since I did my declining of Latin tenses, so I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce mos maiorum correctly. But would you explain to the audience what the mos maiorum is? Because I believe that's fracturing in the United States. We have one. People don't know it. The Brits have one. You know it. What is a mos maiorum for any country, and what did it mean in Rome?
Well, I think you better remind me of exactly what that means for you, because I'm not altogether sure myself.
The traditions and customs that one does, like the courses of honors that you would run. You used to do things in order, and you couldn't become a consul till you were 42, I think. But then one by one, the old rules fell. Rules that had endured for a couple of hundred years fell by the wayside one by one. And I see in the United States right now we're talking about expanding the Supreme Court. That has not changed in 130 years. That would be a disaster if we expanded the number of justices on the Supreme Court, in my view. But it would be just another step away from our mos maiorum, tradition.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. And yes, you're right. They started to give special sweeping powers to consuls and to military commands, which were supposed to be time limited. They ceased to do that. They started to bend the rules. The other point I was going to make is that the increasingly power passed into the hands of the mob, who could occupy the Senate, who could, howl down people they disliked, a kind of lynch mob mentality. And there's no doubt that social media reminds me of the Roman Forum and of a kind of mob mentality. That's the moment the mob is here, and then suddenly we've got to lynch this guy, and it rush across to that. And this destabilizing effect of social media promotes demagoguery and promotes rule outside the normal structures of power. And anarchy is the result. And anarchy always calls forth the strong man who will reimpose order. And
now there's a very interesting parallel. The first volume of the Cicero trilogy is called Imperium. It came out in 2006. It all focuses on the trial of Verres. I think it's a fascinating, really a very, very necessary introduction into the role of the law courts in the late Roman Republic. We are engaged in a series of legal maneuvers in the United States now, and to a certain extent, Boris Johnson's censuring by Parliament is the same sort of public trial and public humiliation. That's sort of a precursor to everything. The rise of giantly famous and public entertainment court systems. Do you sense that that's developing as well?
I can't speak for the United States. Here, I would rather see that Parliament is struggling to contain demagoguery, lying, which Johnson seems to have done. They're trying to cling to the old rules.
Robert Harris, hang on for a second. I got to go to a break. My music is playing in my ear, which you cannot hear. Robert Harris is the author of many books, beginning with Fatherland in 1992, but the Cicero trilogy begins with Imperium. Go and get it. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about what late Roman Republic means. Stay tuned, America. Welcome back, America. My guest is Robert Harris, author extraordinaire, joining me from Great Britain. I'm very grateful for that, Robert. I'm talking about his 3 books, Imperium from 2006, Lustrum from 2009, and 2015 was, let me see here, Dictator. Robert, I am very curious from a technical, how much time does it take for you to learn the subject matter before you write the novel that makes the history accessible to the reader?
Well, in the case of the trilogy, I knew from the start it was going to be 3 volumes because I really just wanted to write. I mean, I was a political journalist. Politics fascinates me. I wrote a novel some people in America may have heard of or seen the movie The Ghost about Tony Blair, or kind of Tony Blair like prime minister and a ghostwriter on Martha's Vineyard. I've always been fascinated by politics. I wanted to write a kind of the original great political book about the struggle for power in ancient Rome. I conceived this idea and I knew it would take a long time. So the first 2 years were nothing but research. Literally, I did nothing else. I built up a research file over 500,000 words, a chronology of the 25 years I wanted to cover. And then I plotted out the books, and I started with the first one. I wanted to in media res, to use a Latin phrase. I wanted to cut in with a good story right from the beginning, and so it begins with this ambitious young senator, Marcus Tullius Cicero, who was a brilliant speaker, and he decides the best way to get on is to take down Verres, the corrupt governor of Sicily. And as you said, the first half of Imperium is taken up really with a great trial where he acts like a kind of ambitious district attorney, the kind of Theodore Roosevelt of the Roman era, I suppose.
Well, I'm fascinated. Go ahead.
No, you go.
I want to know that when you took it to your publisher, I mean, it's written for people like me who love historical fiction. What did they say when you said, I want to do 3 books about Cicero? I mean, you're just coming off this enormous bestseller of The Fatherland, and you show up and you say, I want to do 3 books on ancient Rome. What do they say to you?
Well, I had just written a novel called Pompeii, which did well. Both in Britain, it was a big bestseller here, and actually a bestseller in America as well. And so there was the publishers thought that this would be gold dust, really, I think. I mean, in the end, the books have done well in England and in Germany, and the first one certainly did pretty well in the States. But I know I'm asking a lot of the reader to follow the life and career of this guy through the law courts and through the elections. And there's a kind of what a friend of mine called toga resistance, that people don't necessarily want to read books about people who lie down to eat and wear these strange costumes and so on. All I can say is, please, if you look beyond that, you'll find everything you really need to know about power and about making speeches and the law and philosophy and warfare and intrigue. You know, it was all done more than 2,000 years ago. And our politics, I mean, your country in particular, with a Senate and with all the courts and the elected judiciary and so on, it was the founding fathers modeled it on ancient Rome.
Absolutely. Tom Ricks has written a pretty great book fairly recently about how deeply impacted the framers were by the Roman Republic and not by the late Roman Republic's collapse. And that's why I love the Cicero trilogy too much and recommend it to everyone, beginning with Imperium. I listened to them. I encourage people on long car rides to get the audio version. Robert Harris, I want to make sure I know what you're working on next. It's like you're like Ken Follett. You never stop writing books. What's on the table right now?
Well, I just brought out in the last year in America a book called Active Oblivion, which is all about the English Civil War and the 2 men who signed the King Charles I death warrant, who fled to New England and were hunted across New England for more than a decade. And that is coming out in paperback in America in a couple of months. And I'm starting a novel now, just written about the first 10 pages of a novel set in Britain in 1914. And it's a kind of political intrigue novel and with espionage. So history fascinates me because I think if we, as Cicero said, people who are ignorant of the past are doomed to remain always a child, because what is the worth of a human life unless woven into the study of history by the lives of our ancestors?
Oh, so well said. I'm not going to improve on that. Sir Christopher Clark from Oxford has written a book called Sleepwalkers on that 1914 period. It's not accessible to people who won't spend 50 days reading it, but novels that do what you do serve the public so well, and I appreciate your efforts, and I encourage everyone to get Imperium. I'm going to go get Active Oblivion. I didn't know about that. I like the English Civil War. Thank you for joining me this morning, Robert Harris. Come back another time, and I encourage everyone, spend your summer with Robert Harris, and you will be better off for it. Start with Imperium, move on to Lustrum and to Conspiracy. Thank you so much for being with me. Thank you, America, for listening. Late Roman Republic indeed. Hunter Biden, Donald Trump in the dock. It's all very familiar to anyone who reads and listens to the people who recount for you what it was 22,000 years ago. Everything comes back around again. Hopefully we dodge that bullet. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Ben. I'll be back and forth to D.C. by the time I talk to you tomorrow.